YouTube. It is becoming more and more apparent that the meaning of words, especially now, is not something a lot of people really care about. To be more specific, the use of certain English words, everyday words, is evolving, or more accurately in this case, not being used in its original understood context. And we're not talking about words that are rarely used in everyday conversations between most people, such as convivial, usurpation, or rapscallion. And I'm not saying these words previously mentioned are not used and have not been used, but those words are generally not in an average everyday conversation between neighbors. We're talking about common words used fairly regularly that most people would immediately recognize, or at least think they recognize. Let me also point out that the meaning and use of words can change over time naturally, and words can have multiple meanings. However, what we are focused on is the broad understanding and use of words from a historical context. How have people traditionally used and understood certain words versus how the word is being used and understood today? So the point of this video is to demonstrate my belief that some words in a broader context are changing unnecessarily and unintentionally even. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but there does seem to be no good reason as to why certain words are losing their intended meaning, at least in the original context. It's also fairly annoying to see this happen in real time without any thought or concern as to why. Why is this happening? It's also frustrating to see the appropriate meaning applied correctly in very specific situations, but then simultaneously its historical context is abandoned in the broader use of the term right next time you see it. So the word we are looking at today is the word nation and the duality of its modern use. Now, I'm sure some people may know the actual historical meaning of this word, but based on my anecdotal experience, as well as when I seldomly watch TV, the news, it is apparent, for whatever reason, a lot of people use this word outside of its historical context. My contention is that in general, most people think nation is interchangeable with words like state, government, country, etc. But let me demonstrate how this is not necessarily the case, especially from a historical standpoint. That nation doesn't really and has never really meant to be intended as a substitute for state, government, or country. We'll begin by reviewing some examples to demonstrate the first part of this point. Links, let me also say that links will be placed in the description below, but let's start with premise one. People generally use the word nation currently to mean country or government. So the first site that we're looking at here is a Pew Research Center article from August 29th, 2023, titled "The Majority of Americans Say the U.S. is one of the greatest countries in the world." All right. Well, if you keep scrolling down, look at in about the third paragraph, here's where our word comes in. Opinions about the nation's global standing have changed slightly since 2019. That year, 24% said the U.S. is the single greatest nation, 55% said it was one of the best countries, and 21% said other countries are better than the U.S. This paragraph literally uses nation interchangeably with country. Also, the title reads as if it's talking about a country as well as countries. So here's premise one, a great example of premise one. Please also note that if you want to read this article, which will be linked in the description, this is from a purely political standpoint. There are no mention of demographics, ethnicities, anything like that in this article at all. This article's intention, my belief, and I think it's fairly obvious, that the word nation is interchangeable with country. Moving on to the next example. This is actually a CBS News transcript of one of their shows Face the Nation, whereby on January 21st, 2024, a news anchor host interviewed Nikki Haley, presidential candidate in 2024. Well, the thing that I want to point out here is the actual title and name of the show. So if you look at the title here, Transcript, 2024 GOP presidential hopeful Nikki Haley on Face the Nation. Well, what singular nation is CBS News trying to face? Who are they facing? Which, by the way, Nikki Haley goes on in this transcript to talk about national security. Well, the national security of who? What people? What people group? Is another example. This is an ABC News article from October 19th, 2023, titled, Biden in a rare Oval Office speech says U.S. holds the world together amid wars in Israel and Ukraine. I'm not going to get into the politics of any of this, only to point out in the very first sentence, in a rare address, highlighted here, in a rare address to the nation from the Oval Office, President Joe Biden on Thursday night made the case to Americans that it's vital to both global and U.S. national security. Here, again, singular nation, talking about the United States and American citizens, U.S. national security. The United States is a government. It's a state. The nation seems to be being used interchangeably with the United States, with the state, the political entity known as the United States. So premise one, I think it's been demonstrated, or at least one can reasonably argue that, yes, in these certain cases, nation is being used interchangeably with the political entity known as the United States or a country, or various other political uses of the word. Now, you can go on I'm sure any news, mainstream news, your local news, and hear news anchors talk about the nation, the nation. I didn't have any clips. I didn't feel like going through a lot of videos to try to get clips. But just to drive the point home that most people in general, to include the news, the government in many cases, but that's also where I'm going to show and demonstrate that in other cases, they don't necessarily use the word in that context. It's actually very clear that they're using it in the historical context. But the word is just thrown around in a way that most people, I would argue, understand it to just be interchangeable with certain things that it doesn't necessarily, in its historical context, mean. So what does a simple Google search point out when you just say nation and definition? Here is actually pretty interesting. When you look at the dictionary from Oxford Languages, which is the first one that pulls up, it's not even Wikipedia, it defines a nation as a large body of people united by common descent. Interesting. History, culture, or language, inhabiting a particular country or territory. This should right off the bat let you know that a nation does not necessarily mean country or territory. Inhabiting a particular country or territory. Nation is not necessarily the same as country or territory. That's what that's telling you. If you look to the right here, this is the actual Wikipedia definition of nation. This is a very, I would argue, modern definition. And when I say modern, last 50 years. So this is not a word that has changed meaning up until recently being the last, 50 years, maybe a little longer than that. But prior to that, for a long time, this English word meant something different. But Wikipedia says a nation is a large type of social organization where a collective identity has emerged from a combination of shared features across a given population, such as language, history, ooh, there's ethnicity again, culture, territory, or society. Some nations are constructed around ethnicity, while others are bound by political constitutions. So this again brings up the word ethnicity. There's a reason I'm highlighting that and showing that, but this is a modern Wikipedia definition of the word nation. Well, what is a modern, dictionary other than the Oxford languages? Most people know Merriam-Webster or Webster's dictionary. You scroll down and click on this: nation, noun, nationality. If you look down here under B, a community of people composed of one or more nationalities and possessing more or less defined territory and government. So this seems to be a little different than the prior Oxford definition. The language is slightly different, but similar. C, a territorial division containing a body of people of one or more nationalities and usually characterized by relatively large size and independent status. Again, a very vague term. What does nationality mean? In this case, it seems like we need to understand what nationality is. So let's click on that. Nationality, national. Nationalism, national status, specifically a legal relationship involving allegiance on the part of an individual and usually protection on the part of the state. B, membership in a particular nation, political independence, or existence as a separate nation. We've already looked at nation under the modern definition on this website, which is Merriam-Webster. Then if you scroll all the way down here, in 5A and 5B, you actually see the more traditional use of the term. A people having a common origin, tradition, language capable of forming or actually constituting a nation state. Nation state, that's interesting. First time we've seen the words put together. B, an ethnic group constituting one element of a larger unit, such as a nation. So now we're going to demonstrate why this is a very whitewashed and, not necessarily the original intended use of this term. And we're going to demonstrate this through various modern demonstrations of what the original broad context of this term meant, as well as historical context. And we'll start with the historical context by going through the etymology of the word, because, a lot of words have origins, and especially in English, as well as other European languages, words usually can go back pretty far and have origins going back to Latin or Greek or something like that. But here's a online etymological dictionary describing the word nation. Nation, I don't know if that's the appropriate way to enunciate that part, but literally the first thing written here is, quote unquote, a race of people, large group of people with common ancestry and language. Interesting. That seems very different from the other definitions that we've seen in general use. From Old French, nation, birth, rank, descendants, relatives, country, homeland. And directly from Latin, natio, which means birth, origin, breed, stock, kind, species, race of people, tribe. Literally, that which has been born. Interesting. Now, you can continue reading down here, because I can hear people now saying, well, swamp fox. There's also additional meanings, and you're only reading a certain part of the word. Well, no, we can continue reading here. The word is used in English in a broad sense, a race of people, an aggregation of persons of the same ethnic family and speaking the same language. And also in the narrower sense, a political society composed of a government and subjects or citizens and constituting a political unit, an organized community inhabiting a defined territory within its sovereignty, which its sovereignty is exercised. So, Swamp Fox, you see, it can also mean, what the general Merriam-Webster's dictionary is defining it as in modern times, as well as bound by political constitutions and inhabiting a country or territory. So therefore, why can't we use it in, as a general term for country or state or government? Well, let's actually look at its historical context in the broader sense of what people actually used to think this word meant. When this word was used, what did people think? Did they think country, or did they actually think of a distinct peoples group related by ethnicity and descendancy? So if you notice the thumbnail on this video, that is actually a picture of a dictionary that I own. I own a Webster's dictionary from 1919 because I like to look at older versions of dictionary, because obviously this video is about the meaning of words, and just having high pattern recognition, you notice the meaning of words changing over time and changing unnecessarily. So we're actually going to look at what a 1919 third edition Webster's Dictionary collegiate edition actually defined nation as. So here's the Library of Congress, image 686 of Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. The bottom here, I've zoomed in multiple times. Nation. Latin, natio, origin, a being, born. So number one, definition of nation: a people connected by ties of blood, generally manifested in community of language, religion, customs, etc. That is a very, very different definition than the modern Webster's definition. Nowhere was this mentioned except for down at the bottom page. You can't even get it going back to the word nation in Merriam Dictionary. You have to go to nationality, scroll all the way down, and it says an ethnic group constituting one element of a larger unit. That is not necessarily the same definition as a people connected by ties of blood, generally manifested in community of language, religions, customs, etc. Generally manifested in community of language, religion. Nation was more tied to blood and descendancy than it had to do with the general manifestation of a language, religion, or customs. But I can hear people now, you can keep reading, any aggregation of people having like institutions and customs and a sense of social homogeneity and mutual interest, which again is tying back to like institutions relating to blood, which manifests through language, religions, customs. You can keep reading, the body of inhabitants of a country united under a single government. So again, this is also demonstrating that a nation is not necessarily a country, because multiple people can inhabit a country and be under a single government. That's called an empire. So literally the first thing you read in connection with a nation is a people connected by ties of blood, generally manifested in community of language, religion, customs, etc. So I'm making the argument that the historical use of this term, nation, nationalism, really relates to ethnicity, blood, and people groups. It's related to race, and a homogeneous race. That's generally the general understanding of nation. And we can also get into modern-ish takes of 60, 70 years ago of what nation and nationalism meant. We can also get into more modern, understanding of today. So, one of the things that we can look at to really tie the meaning of this word in a broader sense is, the Second World War. We can get into a lot of leaders who are known as nationalists, but I'm going to be careful with certain leaders I'm going to talk about, but I don't think this leader will be as raise as many red flags as certain other leaders. But Mussolini, who was the fascist leader of the Italians during World War II. Most people are familiar with Mussolini, so this is not some obscure political leader from 100 years ago or 70 years ago. But what did Mussolini believe? What did he think about Italy and their part in the war? Well, if you scroll down here, and this is Wikipedia. This is not some old version of a dictionary from the 1800s, but this reads down here in the highlighted section: Mussolini denounced the PSI, his views now centering on Italian nationalism instead of socialism. Italian nationalism. Nationalism, there's that term. Well, what was Italian nationalism? Should we just assume that Italian nationalism means inhabitants of an area who just so happen to speak the same language and also are under the same government? Is that the context of the word that we should use? Is that the context of the word when people think of fascist or Mussolini and his form of nationalism? Is it just some general vague term about a group of people or people underneath a government? Or is it used in the same context as necessarily meaning a government or political body? Well, let's see. Clicking on this link here, Italian nationalism. Again, this is Wikipedia. Italian nationalism is a movement which believes that the Italians are a nation with a single homogeneous identity, and therefore seek to promote the cultural unity of Italy as a country. From an Italian nationalist perspective, Italianness is defined as claiming culture and ethnic descent from the Latins. Italianness is defined as claiming cultural and ethnic descent from the Latins. Nationalism and nation in its historical context has typically and most usually meant a homogeneous group of people connected by blood, ancestry, descendancy, yada, yada, yada. It has only recently been used as a vague, interchangeable term to mean country or political entity or the United States. And how can we demonstrate this point even further? Well, let's go to the modern website of the U.S. Department of Interior. Here you go. This is not an obscure website. This is literally .gov. And this is the federal acknowledgement for the recognition of Indian tribes, Native American tribes. You can scroll here, and the link will be in the description below. And you can read all this, but this is basically just establishing and providing a history for how did the federal government recognize an American tribal group that exists, as an Indian tribal group. Well, here are some historical regulations. Number 5 has been highlighted. The group needs to demonstrate that its membership consists of individuals who descend from the historical Indian tribe or from historical Indian tribes that combined and functioned as a single autonomous political entity and provide a current membership list. To be considered by the federal government as a nation / Indian tribe, you had to demonstrate descent from historical Indian tribes or from multiple tribes that combined and function as a single autonomous political entity. Regardless of how you read that, you needed to show descendancy from the historical Indian tribe. And for those of you who are, who are saying, well, swamp fox, there's an or there. That doesn't necessarily mean, what you're claiming it to mean. Au but contraire, it does. Let's go to the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee Nation's actual Cherokee.gov website for tribal registration. How would I be able to register and be recognized by the Cherokee Nation as a part of their people group, as a part of their tribe? Highlighted criteria below. The basic criteria for Cherokee Nation tribe citizenship is that an application must be submitted along with documents that directly connect a person to an enrolled lineal ancestor who is listed on the Dawes Roll, Final Roll of Citizens and Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribe. You have to register via the Cherokee Nation, have to show ancestry, descent. I argue that this is the original context of the word nation. The Cherokee, you can read further. The Cherokee Nation Registration Office processes certificate of degree of Indian blood. Really? So the Cherokee Nation seems to be applying a people connected by ties of blood. Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee Nation Registration Office processes certificate of degree of Indian blood. You have to show ancestry. Again, I argue, going back to the original article, this is how most people think of the word nation. It's interchangeable with country, and that is not the historical context, nor is it necessarily how it's currently being used in every situation. That is my argument. That is the word for the day. I hope this was helpful for anybody that is interested in language the way that I am. I'll do more of these on various words in the future. And with that, I appreciate anybody that has listened. Please subscribe.